In Arkansas, investigators continue to look into one of the nation's worst cases of mass murder.
What's going on in somebody's mind when they're strangling their own children and grandchildren?
Journey back with case investigators as they relive the Ronald Gene Simmons murders.
I've never really disclosed it publicly.
A killing rampage that left 16 dead and a 3-year-old boy without a mother.
Love you, Mom. My wife and I are here with our daughter, and she played with those kids, you know? Like, they would draw chalk on the sidewalk and ride their scooters together, and now they're just... We don't even know what happened.
I am horrified. I have been out here since 2018, and I have never lived where there has been a triple homicide ever.
May 12th, 2025, Day of the Mother. The Caldwell family's little inconspicuous home in Arkansas was hidden behind a well-kept grass, a mute reminder of a life that was completely normal. James Caldwell, a respected neighborhood builder, had just finished making pancakes in the kitchen. His wife, Elizabeth, a well-liked middle school teacher, was upstairs helping their 2 kids, Lily, 10, and Ethan, 8, pick out the best flowers from the garden. A family that was all about bake sales and baseball practice was the picture of suburban peace. But that morning, a shadow had already crossed their doorway, even if they couldn't see or hear it. Elizabeth contacted her sister at 11:37 a.m. to wish her a good holiday. The chat was nice, boring, and completely usual. At 11:42 a.m., though, her phone suddenly cut off. Not because of a dropped call, but because the phone was systematically and purposefully destroyed. 5 minutes after the last "I love you," there was no sound in the Caldwell house. The family was still living there. The doors were still locked from the inside. But the peace was now absolute, an unnatural, unsettling silence that will soon encompass the entire village. What occurred in those 5 minutes between the happy goodbye and the uncomfortable stillness? The first response on the scene was Sheriff's Deputy Mark Jensen, a man who had spent 20 years in that county dealing solely with traffic fines and the occasional stray dog. He found the front door closed, the windows covered, and the air conditioner humming a lonely tune. Jensen circled the house, his training teaching him to expect a false alert, possibly a defective lock or a small medical episode. What he saw through the kitchen window defied sense. The table was set for brunch, plates stacked with cooling uneaten pancakes. A Mother's Day card remained propped open next to Elizabeth's unused coffee cup. The scene was immobile, caught in an instant of domesticity, but the unnerving detail was the small, precise smear of deep crimson on the clean white surface, like a single angry stroke of paint. Jensen had to break the glass to enter, breaking the Sunday stillness with a violent crack. The violence inside, however, was silent, private, and genuinely horrifying. The massacre was not chaotic, it was surgical. James, Elizabeth, Lily, and Ethan were all found in separate rooms, a distribution that suggested planning, not panic. There were no traces of forceful entry, no destroyed furniture, no frenzied fight. It was almost as if the family had simply submitted to a nightmare that landed on their home. The medical examiner corroborated the timeline. The attacks occurred within a precise 3 to 5 minute range, but the sword was the first big riddle. No gunshots were heard. The method was essentially blunt force, yet the impact was rapid, devastating, and ruthlessly efficient. Even more puzzling was the identity of the person who had locked the house from the inside, washed down the surfaces with a horrifying thoroughness, and then simply vanished into thin air. A little religious item was found carefully placed near to Elizabeth's body. Was it a signature, an ironic gesture, or a final terrible clue? The initial probe focused on immediate family and close associates. The tranquil village of Willow Creek suddenly felt a glare of suspicion. James Caldwell's business colleague, David Thorne, was first to be interviewed. Thorne stated he was fishing 20 miles away, a claim backed up by an easily verifiable receipt for bait and tackle. Yet, Thorne's tone during the interview was too calm, too composed for a man whose best buddy had just been killed. Detectives spent 2 days ripping apart his alibi, seeking for gaps in the fishing record, but found none. They moved their emphasis to Elizabeth's former students, a couple of whom had troublesome pasts. The quest was a frenetic, desperate scrabble for a motive in a location where only peaceful devotion had been expected. It was apparent the killer was someone who understood the layout, someone the family would have readily welcomed into their sanctuary. They had to look closer to home, into the little, intimate circles of trust that had been abused. The Caldwell family's technology offered a look into their final moments, but also a digital red herring. Lily Caldwell's iPad showed she had been watching a cartoon just moments before the power down. Ethan's gaming system was in sleep mode. James's phone was on the charger. The significant finding, however, was Elizabeth's smartwatch. It registered a rapid, steep jump in heart rate at 11:40 a.m., 3 minutes after the phone call ended. This was the instant the dread began, the moment the illusion of safety dissolved. But the watch featured a secondary feature of voice-activated transcribing service. Detectives obtained a single fragmentary phrase recorded by the watch's microphone shortly before the spike. Why? This brief, muttered piece of a query was not spoken in fear, but in astonishment, suggesting the person standing before Elizabeth was not a stranger, but someone entirely unexpected. 3 weeks later, the case had gone cold, and the terror in Willow Creek was obvious. People stopped leaving their doors unlocked. The concern was only compounded when a man stepped into the Willow Creek police station around 2 a.m. He was a familiar face, Michael Harrison, a former neighbor of the Caldwells, renowned for his erratic conduct, but never for violence. He stepped straight up to the counter and just said, "It was me. I know what happened to the Caldwells." The confession was astonishingly simple, made without emotion or ceremony. He supplied facts that only the perpetrator could know. The precise placement of the figurines, the sort of blunt weapon used, and the fact that James had been the first victim. He said he had merely walked over that morning, a spontaneous action that led to an unfathomable disaster. The interrogation of Michael Harrison became the core of the inquiry. He sat across the table, his eyes empty, his voice a low, continuous drone. Detectives pressed for a motive. Was it money? A long-standing feud? A romantic obsession? Harrison presented none of the traditional reasons. He spoke of a calling, a necessary cleansing, using religious words distorted into something malevolent. He stated he had been observing the family for years, envious of their lovely, bright lives that seemed to ridicule his own solitary existence. But his story was too clinical, too polished. He confessed to every crime, but his answers lacked the emotional depth anticipated of such a horrible deed. It was too easy. If you are finding this story interesting, then subscribe to Crimzcene and switch on alerts. Now, back to the disquieting details of the Caldwell atrocity. As the community sought a fast conviction, the lead detective, a veteran called Sergeant Reyes, harbored a nagging worry. Harrison's account, while absolutely correct, was fundamentally empty. Reyes opted to revisit the initial evidence, focusing on Harrison's timing. It was then that a horrific discovery was made. Harrison's car has a smart tracking gadget for insurance purposes. The GPS data plainly proved Harrison was 20 miles north of the Caldwell residence at a quiet fishing site not 10 minutes after the massacre was already complete. The timeline was impossible. The practicalities of the travel were simply not doable in the allotted window. Michael Harrison had confessed to the crime, possessed the detailed details, yet he could not possibly have been the killer. The entire case had centered on a confession that was totally and plainly untrue. The discovery of the phony confession broke the inquiry. Why would an innocent man admit to such a heinous crime? The explanation was in Harrison's recorded mental health history, a deep-seated delusion, and a yearning for celebrity, even infamy. He craved the attention, even the judgment, that the Caldwells had never given him. This confession was an act of tremendous self-destruction and a lesson in misdirection. The real killer, the one who had provided Harrison with the specific non-public details of the crime, was now 20 steps ahead. The police knew they were seeking a ghost, a killer so cold and cunning that they exploited an innocent, mentally challenged guy as a human shield. The horrible reality was that the massacre was merely the first act of a plot, SGT. Reyes refocused on the one remaining puzzle piece, James Caldwell's private life. James had been diligent in his job and personal records. In a secret compartment in his home office, officers found a small, lockable notebook. Inside were cryptic comments indicating financial distress and a desperate, secret obligation owed to a previous client. The client was a quiet, unassuming man named Arthur Vance, a man known for his placid, almost robotic manner and a history of harsh revenge for perceived slights. Vance had not been on any original suspect list because his link to James was solely professional and appeared unimportant. The diary post from the week before the murder was stark. Arthur knows, he said, payment or everything changes. The truth of Arthur Vance was a terrible pill. Vance was not a savage. He was a careful engineer who could calculate an outcome with scary precision. He had used his engineering skills to learn the family's routine and their vulnerability. He had confessed to Harrison by planting the particular information in a premeditated conversation, knowing Harrison's delicate mental state would do the rest. He wanted the community and the police chasing a false lead. When confronted, Vance was perfectly cool, expressing no fear or regret. He said that James Caldwell had cheated him, and the destruction of his family was not an act of passion, but an act of fair accounting. He viewed the lives he took as mere variables in an equation of retribution. The lack of emotion was more terrible than any wrath. Arthur Vance was caught, accused, and subsequently convicted, his calm confession confirming his destiny. But the case of the Arkansas Family Massacre remains an open wound in Willow Creek, a scar that extends deeper than any tidy settlement. The community is left with two villains, the methodical killer who sought justice, and the delusional confessor who sought glory in the wake of tragedy. The ultimate, disturbing ambiguity is this: who was the greater monster? The man who killed 4 people without conscience, or the man who willingly perverted the truth and diverted justice for his own twisted fame? The lives of the Caldwell family were not merely ended. They were obliterated by the junction of cold calculation and a desperate yearning for attention. And in the peaceful corners of Willow Creek, they know that whatever came next would stay with them forever.